Well, Shane, we've held off long enough. Got an outstanding interview here with Rusty Mansell of 24/7 Sports. Very gracious with his time, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one.
This is Johnny's uncle, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. Don't Google it.
Hey, well, we got a special guest on the show. Very pleased to have Rusty Mansell on the show for the first time ever. And of course, he works for 24/7 Sports, Dawgs 247. You got to check out his podcast, Junkyard Dawgcast. And heck, everybody's already following Rusty already, but he's at Mansell 247 on Twitter. Rusty, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, appreciate it. Like I said, put a tweet out a few minutes ago, and there's a lot of great podcasts, man. But you're definitely in my weekly content. I do a daily walk, so I rotate every day, and you're about the right amount. You're about 45 minutes. So I usually get in my podcast with you once a week during my walk. So keep up the good work. Appreciate you having me, man.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate the kind words, and we're just so fired up for football. And I got a lot of Georgia questions to ask you, but before we get to that, I got a lot of Razorbacks that listen to the show, and I know that Sam Pittman well from his time there in Athens. So I was just wondering, it seems like he's everybody's favorite coach. Can you share maybe a favorite story you have of Coach Pittman?
Well, I didn't really know Coach before he came to Georgia. I don't think he hides the fact that he is a big country music fan. I mean, he loves country music. He's a big country music guy. And in my hometown in Rome, Georgia, they put on concerts and do a great job of getting people here. We're in Northwest Georgia, about an hour from Atlanta and Northwest, and Luke Combs played a concert. It was a makeup deal. Like Luke Combs had already made it. Like he was past Rome. Like all these guys, Jason Aldean, Luke Bryan, all these guys have played Rome, and they were like there was 100 people there. But Luke Combs had made a promoter a promise. He said, "Listen, no matter what, I'll come back to Rome one day and play a concert." And he did. I think this was in July or June of 2019. Well, anyway, me and my wife go, obviously, and we're there, and we pull up to park, and I pull up, and right beside me is Sam Pittman and his wife. And we're kind of the backstage area, man. And he is just, I tell you what, he had flown back, I think, from the Bahamas and landed like 6 that morning and drove all the way up here. And
oh man,
just really got to hang out with him that day and just chill. But you can see why that guy is an elite recruiter. He's just that guy. There's not an element ever that he's out of place in. It doesn't matter what group of people he's with. He kind of owns the room. And you see players that played for him. I ran into Jamari Salyer this summer at a camp, and I said, "How are things going?" He goes, "Well, things are going good." And we started talking about Coach Pittman. He goes, "Man, I miss that guy. I love that guy. That guy's, he's that dude." And they got Matt Luke at Georgia, which was an unbelievable replacement. Kirby Smart had a home run there, but Sam Pittman he's that guy. And I've told everybody, and I'll tell the Arkansas fans, I don't know why people aren't digging into them as much, but if I'm correct, they have the most returning seniors of any team in the country. I'm telling you right now, I know they've got that Texas game circled, but if Arkansas beats Texas in game 2 on national TV, that state and that program is going to go quicker, a lot quicker than most people think.
Absolutely. Well, before we get to that game, we got one of our own there for everybody in the state of Georgia is looking forward to with the Clemson showdown week 1. Just how fired up are you, and how fired up are all the Bulldogs that you deal with over there at Dawgs 247?
I said it last night on the board. We need a game. We're at that point where everybody on the board they're just anxious. They're kind of at each other for any little thing. Like that Georgia community, and I'm sure every big community in college football right now, they need a game. This is those dog days of summer, literally, when there's no games. You just get a little bit of camp stuff. Kirby Smart obviously has shut it down in Athens, so there's very little media access. So it's just hard as a fan base right now. They're excited about this game. It's funny because, I thought about it last night. Trevor Lawrence right here, 20 minutes from me this way. Nick Chubb right here, 20 minutes from me this way. 2 Northwest Georgia guys. They're going to play Saturday night. The Browns play at the Jaguars.
Oh, wow.
And then I'm pretty sure afterwards there's going to be a little bit of smack talk with Georgia Clemson, but this is a massive. This is one of those. I don't care what fan base you're a part of. you're like, I'm not doing anything that night. Georgia Clemson's on, and I'm watching that game.
Do you think this will be the biggest regular season showdown of Kirby Smart's career, or do you maybe put last year's Alabama game maybe above it?
I think it's I hadn't thought about that. That's a great question. It very well might be. This is a game where there's a lot of momentum riding on this. I talk a lot about Georgia, different places, and here's what I find interesting. You take Georgia and the history of Georgia, and it's always been a really good program. But they've had those glory days from time to time, and mostly it was during the Herschel Walker, Vince Dooley era, that 80 to 82. But if you take away those 3 years and you look at what Kirby Smart has done in the first 5 years, I mean, the guy won an SEC championship. He played for 2 more. He won a Rose Bowl. He won a Sugar Bowl. He won a New Year's Day 6. That's a pretty damn good first 5 years for Kirby Smart. Now, the bar has been raised from what he has done, but I think the perception of Georgia outside the Georgia fan base is a little different. The Georgia fan base is very excited for Kirby Smart. Now, national perception wise, if he wins this game, Georgia's going to be looked at a lot different. Like, yeah, they're here. This is a team. They're worthy of this national championship talk. If they lose, they're going to fight that all season until they probably get into that Mercedes-Benz again. And that's what I say about Georgia. They've done everything, but they got to win again in December in Mercedes-Benz, because if you win there, all the cards laid out for you in January, you have all the opportunities, but Georgia's got to find a way to win that game in December. It just so happens this year, it's going to be a monster one to start off in Charlotte versus Clemson.
Now, in that game, how confident, I know, media access is limited right now, but how confident are you that the secondary with the incoming transfers and, that there's plenty of talent there, just kind of inexperience. How confident are you that they'll be able to hold up against Clemson, who here in the last couple of days announced Justin Ross is now, full go. So that's just another weapon that Georgia's defense has to account for.
I think I think the secondary's best friend will be Georgia's front seven. Can they get pressure on DJ? Can they get to him? Can they flush him out of the pocket? Because listen, I've spent a lot of time around DJ. I spent a whole week with him in Texas at the and Bryce Young, which was really cool. We had them on separate teams. And I'll say this, DJ he's an elite quarterback. His arm is incredible. It's like he throws a baseball. Now, if you want to compare him to what Trevor Lawrence did, Trevor Lawrence was so underrated with his legs and how you had to account for that every play. DJ's not that type of guy. He's going to stand in there and he's going to deliver the ball, big time arm. He's a very smart guy. You're not going to fool him much. So I think Georgia's secondary, the key for them is that front seven getting pass rush, because if you can do that, it makes things a lot easier. But there's a lot of inexperience, very talented guys. Now, Keely Ringo is very talented. You bring over Darian Kendrick, who's going to know a lot about, obviously, his former team. Tyke Smith's there. Lewis Seen is the guy. Lewis Seen is a flat-out dude. He's an NFL first-rounder. I'll say it right now. Kid out of Texas, safety for Georgia. He's a bad dude, but there's a lot of inexperience in that back end. So I think it's going to be a very, very high-scoring game, and I think it's going to be very close. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game for early in the season. Offenses tend to be a little bit behind. But I think as far as you're talking about Georgia secondary, I think the best friend for them will be that front seven. And can they pressure DJ and keep him in the pocket?
Now, I really wanted to ask you about the makeup of this team and how you think they'll handle all the expectations and the adversity is going to happen. How do you think this team will react? Because I always roll my eyes when people say, well, Georgia's hyped up every year. Well, the beauty of college football is every 2 to 3 years, your entire roster is completely different. So who cares the expectations when Stafford was there or Aaron Murray or Jake Fromm? That's got nothing to do with this Bulldog team. So, right. You're the go-to man. How will this team handle expectations and adversity if it arises?
On paper, you look at who's the leaders, who's the guy. Last year, nobody knew who was going to play quarterback. Jamie Newman. This time last year, Jamie Newman's still a Georgia Bulldog. Right. He didn't leave until after that second scrimmage when things didn't sound like they were kind of going in maybe the direction that he had anticipated, and he made a decision to leave, and that's certainly his decision. But I think when you look at this, JT Daniels, clearly the guy. JT Daniels got to have spring practice. You bring back Jordan Davis, who's probably a first rounder, a guy that's been there 4 years in that locker room. Kobe Dean, here's a kid with like a 4.1 GPA. You got some very experienced Zeus White, Zamir White. You've got that key senior upper class leadership, in my opinion. That's an advantage for Georgia. When you go back and look at 2017, you had the Lorenzo Carters, you had the Davin Bellamy, you had the Roquan Smith, Nick Chubb, Sonny Michel. All those guys decided to come back. Well, not only did they come back as good players, they came back as guys that could run the locker room. So I think Georgia not only brought back some good players, they brought back some guys on both sides of the ball. Jamari Salyer, obviously, definitely probably a leader on the offensive side as well. So I think the key components going into the season on paper is why Georgia is getting all of this national championship type hype. The people that dig into them a little bit, you got a returning quarterback who looked good in the back end of the schedule. Got a lot of key pieces back. Offensive line is going to be young, replacing a lot of guys. You lost George Pickens. Can Eric Gilbert help you early on or not? There's a lot of questions there to be answered, but 1 through 85, unless I'm correct, 1 through 85, this is every one of Kirby Smart's players. So this is fully his program now.
Now, you mentioned JT Daniels. We've seen a ton of elite quarterbacks come in and out of Athens. And I mean, recent history, long-term history. I mean, it's like a quarterback factory down there.
Yep.
Where would you rate JT Daniels, just maybe his pure arm talent based on all the quarterbacks you've seen down there come through Georgia?
I think with JT, it's a lot of comparison to Jake Fromm. He's a very, very smart guy. He is, like, from what I understand, off the charts smart film wise. I talked to an SEC coach Sunday night, a former SEC coach. We were talking about JT Daniels. I said, hey, what do you think about him when you see him? He goes, he's rusty. He's really good. He gets them in and out of the right plays. His knee must have been really messed up for them not to play him, because he's clearly their guy. So, I'm going to kind of tone down a little bit the JT Daniels things. I think he is clearly their guy. He's the guy to lead them this year. But I think people are putting all these expectations on him. Let's let him play a couple of games. Clemson by far is going to be the best team he's played. Let's see how he does in that game, how he goes through the season. I think he's going to have a really big year, but I worry about so many people put so much on him, so much, pressures and things. So let's let him play a couple of games. This Clemson game is huge for a lot of people, but I think if JT Daniels comes out and fires that thing around, 4 touchdowns, 350, 400 yards, with those wide receivers and that young offensive line, some talented guys, I think then the expectation for JT Daniels will shoot through the roof. He'll be everywhere in every article.
Now, what are your thoughts on Muschamp stepping up as a full-time assistant and Scott Cochran? Do you think he'll be back? And, what does it say about Georgia, where here we got a guy that's a multi-time head coach, multi-time elite defensive coordinator, can just, they got a guy lined up ready to go. I mean, it certainly seems like everything's rolling down there in Athens, and they're fully embracing the expectations. And it almost seemed like, I won't say that they anticipated this happening, but if it were to happen, I mean, they had the perfect guy lined up ready to step in.
Kirby Smart won the offseason by keeping Will Muschamp and not letting him go to Texas. That's not getting written about enough. And I'll say this, when Will Muschamp moved into Athens, his family had moved again a couple of times. He's got a sophomore quarterback. He's got a sophomore son by the name of Whit Muschamp, who is definitely going to be a college prospect. He played at Hammond School over in Columbia, South Carolina last year as a freshman. They won the state championship. By the way, he played with Drew Bobo, Mike Bobo's son there, who's now over at Auburn High School. But Whit Muschamp had just moved to Athens Academy. Carol Muschamp, more importantly, had just moved or get their house sold, and they were moving into Athens. So, you get your feet wet in Athens for a couple of weeks, and next thing you know, Steve Sarkisian's calling, and Texas is trying to hire you. And Georgia for certainly had to give him a bump. I don't know what they were paying him initially, but I know on paper they were paying him $300,000 as a senior analyst, and that does not happen. So Kirby Smart, by getting that done, was huge. And then you take the situation with Scott Cochran, and Scott Cochran's, as I said, dealing with some mental health stuff, and he's away. I don't know if he's going to come back this year or not. But I know this: when you have a Will Muschamp, you're able to go to the shelf and put him in place into the field as one of your 10 guys. That is an absolute home run for Georgia. And I know Kirby Smart is tickled to death to have, a close friend, a guy that gave him his first job, but more importantly, a guy that can coach specifically on that defensive side of the ball. Him being able to be involved on the sidelines and not just stand down there holding a clipboard where you really can't technically be involved. Now he can be involved with all facets of the game, including special teams.
Now, again, I know it's been limited down there, but are you hearing any buzz about camp standouts down there in Athens?
It's we talked a little bit. There's a guy named Lad McConkey, who's a young man at North Murray High School, wasn't very highly recruited. I started getting buzz about him through the senior years. Athlete, 6'2", 180-pound kid. I know he tested well at Georgia. There were some other schools involved with him, like Army, Navy, a few of those schools. And all of a sudden, in late December that year, Kirby Smart starts, that his name starts popping up. And, last year, COVID season came in, didn't get to play a ton, but he's had a really, really good offseason for everything we've heard. Tate Ratledge is another young man, another young man that's in his second fall camp now. And he's really, he's going to cement himself into that. He's going to be in the O-line rotation. I don't know if he's going to start, but he's definitely going to play a good bit. It's interesting. Him and Brian Breesy at Clemson, you couldn't separate those two when we were out in Texas that year. And I follow both of them on Instagram, and it seems that Brian Breesy's in Athens a good bit, hanging out with Tate. And if Tate Ratledge were to start, those two are going to buckle it up for 4 quarters here in a couple of weeks. I'm sure there's been a ton of smack talk between those two, but I would think that Lad McConkey is that guy. Adonai Mitchell, and I'm probably butchering his name. He's a young man out of the Nashville area, moved from Texas over here. Everybody I talked to, and that's been from day one, says we got one here. We went and got one, and it got down to Georgia and Ole Miss. And it was ineligible. He timed out. He moved from Texas to Nashville, couldn't play. Then you had a COVID year, so kind of got lost in the shuffle. But I'm very confident that young man is going to be on the field, and I'm very confident he's going to play early against Clemson at wide receiver.
Now, one thing that I keep hearing, and it's no disrespect to Zamir White or James Cook, because I think they are outstanding, and I think they could start basically anywhere in the SEC. But I think Kendall Milton is going to be the best running back on Georgia's roster, and I think more than anything that just speaks to the depth and talent they got on that roster. Am I crazy for making that suggestion?
I think they all bring something different. Zamir is that hammer. I mean, he's a bull. He's a bull in a china shop. Unfortunately for Zamir, which I still think he's going to play NFL, but watching him in high school before those 2 ACLs, it was incredible what that guy could do. But now he's kind of more of a thumper, limited, very powerful guy. James Cook's going to find. I think James Cook's best playing days are ahead of him. Now, I'm very interested in how Georgia uses him this year, but I guarantee you this: when James Cook goes to the NFL, you watch what teams do with Alvin Kamara, and you're like, what happened in college with him? James Cook is going to be a guy when he gets to the NFL, is going to be so versatile, can catch out of the backfield, can stick it up in there. I think he's going to have a really good year. Interested in him. But I agree with you. When you look at overall package, when you look at vision, size, speed, something I'm so is important to me when I evaluate is the ability to break tackles and change direction. Don't give me a guy that can run a 4.1. Give me a guy that can run a 4.5, but he can take 2nd and 7 and turn it into 3rd and 2, not 3rd and 6. He can move the chains. I think Kendall Milton is going to play a bigger role than most of the national media says this year with Georgia. And that's no disrespect to Zamir and James Cook and Kenny McIntosh and any of those other guys who's a very, very loaded room. But I think at the end of the year, when it's all said and done, I agree with you, Mike. When we go back and look, I think Kendall Milton's going to get some very meaningful carries in big-time games for Georgia.
What's the latest on George Pickens with his rehab? And do you think there's any chance he suits up for the Bulldogs this year?
This is purely, God, don't let this go viral, purely speculation on my part. Nobody in my ear, nobody telling me this is my vibe. If Georgia were to beat Clemson and there's everything on the table and everything's on the table, and Georgia at that point would be really good favorites the rest of the year, coming into some tough games, but until you at least get to the Florida game, Georgia should be a really good favorite in every game. If Georgia were to beat Clemson, I think that personally tells George Pickens we got some things to play for here.
Mm-hmm.
But if Georgia were to lose to Clemson and they're fighting uphill the rest of the year to let's win the East and let's try to get in there, at what point does he say, look, I've just got to train for the NFL? I've got to train. Now, if he were to beat Clemson, could he get back and maybe play 5, maybe 4 or 5 games for you? Georgia's competitor. I'll tell you this. I don't know how much George Pickens likes the classroom, but I can tell you this: George Pickens loves football. He loves it. He'll go compete anywhere, anytime. So I know a big goal for him is to go to the NFL, and he is an NFL guy. So it'll be interesting. Just my gut feeling, if Georgia were to beat Clemson, I got a sneaky suspicion that you'll see George Pickens before this year's over with.
Yeah, and he's just in such an interesting spot because I don't think he needs any more, film for the NFL, but let's say they play Alabama in the SEC championship and potentially go to the playoff. That would be really good film for him maybe secure that he's a first round pick. Now, if he's only 80% by that time, it could hurt him. So, I certainly hope he's 100%. We'll just wait and see what happens there. But he's just in a tough spot. You know what?
I'm going on that I know George a little bit, and that dude loves it, man. I mean, that dude, I'll never forget watching him in a 7-on-7. It's Justin Fields at quarterback, Jaden Hazelwood on one side, George Pickens on the other, on a Cam Newton team. Man, it was about 30 degrees one Saturday in Georgia. They're playing. The next day was a huge Nike camp, and I knew that George had worked out all day. I was like, this guy, there's no way this guy's going to work out. The first person I see when I pull up on Sunday morning is George Pickens. I mean, this guy loves it. So putting some pieces together, I think if there's enough on the table to bring him out, that George has got that in him where he's like, look, I'm playing. I want some of this. I'm going to play. Now, there's going to be a lot of people in his ear outside that Georgia program that says, you're crazy. But I know this, that George Pickens loves football. That guy competes. And if there's a lot on the table for Georgia, it will not surprise me at all to see him playing if he is healthy and he clears protocol for the ACL.
All right, Rusty, you're like the go-to man in the state of Georgia for recruiting, and that's arguably the best state in the country for recruiting. So I really wanted to ask you this. Have you seen, maybe it's a little early, but have you seen any impacts in that state with name, image, and likeness? Is that changing anything on the recruiting trail?
Not yet. I think most kids are like, and most parents I talk to are kind of wait and see how things will go. I personally think things are going the way I thought they would, like the quarterbacks would get, a lot of money. I saw the gymnast from LSU got a big deal. DJ got a deal with Dr. Pepper. So, it's going to be here's what I don't know. Okay. Let's just take, for example, let's just say George Pickens is healthy. Let's say George Pickens came out the Clemson game and he scored 3 touchdowns. What does that do for him? Does he pick up new deals the next week, or are businesses waiting to see who the guy is? So I don't know how things are going to go through the season, but the way things have went so far certainly is how I anticipated. Now, some of the deals are a little bit bigger. I do think here's one thing that I don't know if somebody's really touched on is really the autograph, the football cards, the sports memorabilia, those types of things. I'm a card collector, and I'm just sitting here thinking, what's a Spencer Rattler card going to do? All these guys and these types of things. So we'll see. I think some people went with clothing lines and all that. I'm not real sure on that yet, but the memorabilia, autographs, going to your local barbecue place in town. And I couldn't imagine in 2017 had Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, and Roquan Smith took a Wednesday night and went and signed stuff in Athens. They don't tell what they would have made. So,
they'd be making more than Kirby.
Probably. So yeah, maybe on that day. But you look at a guy like Bryce Young, Devontae Smith in Alabama. What would Devontae Smith have done? What would Devontae Smith done in 2017 as a freshman? He catches a play on the national championship. He wins it. You don't think that next week Devontae Smith could have had some autograph sessions in some places? So
no doubt.
I'm interested in the reaction based off performance on the weekend. What happens the next week? And then that, to me, would be kind of the next phase of NIL.
All right, Rusty, I really appreciate all your time. I just got one more question for you. I had a listener ask me this, and I waited till I got in touch with you because I knew you'd be the go-to man for this. But a Georgia fan wanted to know, a lot of elite prospects out of Grayson High School there in recent years. And not many going to Georgia. So you got any information? I mean, maybe it's just a individual case by case basis, but any reason why Georgia maybe has struggled a little bit with Landon Grayson prospects?
No, I get that question a couple of times, and going over there a lot. I mean, I'll just go straight to it. Everybody kind of points that toward Kenyatta Watson. Kenyatta Watson now is a director of recruiting relations at Florida State. I've known Kenyatta a long time. I know this. He showed me his phone one night at a game, and he had text threads with Kirby Smart that was this long. So there's communication. There wasn't anything bad. It's like, hey, this guy's recruiting this guy. You need to offer this guy. So I know this. That wasn't the angle there. I know Georgia recruited his son as well. I just think it's been one of those deals where they haven't gotten it. There were some different deals where they recruited players, and Georgia recruits nationwide. You look at Wande Morris, Kevin Harris, Owen. Georgia recruited Owen Pempo. They didn't get Owen Pempo. He went to Auburn. Well, Georgia winds up getting Nakobe Dean. So in the same class. So I think it's just been a combination of some of those things. But I can tell you this right now, there's a couple of very, very young, talented players there. They just got one. Matter of fact, Griffin Scroggs just flipped from Georgia Tech to Georgia from Grayson. So I'll tell you this, I don't expect that trend to continue. They got a couple of very, very young, talented players that Georgia's offered right now in that 24 and 25 class. And I guarantee you this, that Georgia's going to get at least one or two more in Grayson the next couple of classes for sure.
Well, there you go. Great tease from Rusty Mansell of 24/7 Sports. I really appreciate you, Rusty, for dropping all this knowledge. A terrific interview.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Absolutely. All right, Shade. So some terrific stuff there from Rusty. He truly is one of the best here, not only in the SEC country, but the entire nation, covering college football, covering recruiting. He covers high school. Anytime there's a big commitment out of the state of Georgia, it's usually Rusty there with the mic, presenting all these commitment ceremonies and whatnot. And anytime he puts in a crystal ball there on 24/7 Sports, it's it carries a lot more weight than the vast majority of people that do that. So I really appreciate that, and he really brought it with some Georgia knowledge.
Yeah, it's never, as a Tennessee Vol fan, you hate seeing those tweets come out. You never want to see a crystal ball coming from Rusty, but no, I thought this was a fantastic interview, man. Felt like I was behind the scenes there for a minute, but one thing he talked about that really stood out to me was the Clemson game. And if anybody knows me, they know I'm a diehard Tennessee Vol fan, but I'm close SEC fan. And that means, if Clemson and Georgia are playing each other, I'm rooting for Georgia. That's just who I am. Because one thing that we can stop this year is the Clemson hot train. Okay, they're ranked number 2. We joked about the coaches poll a couple days ago. Well, you want to know who number 2 is? It's Clemson. And if there's any way we could just shut them up, I'm talking like a 40-50 point victory, Mike, so we don't have to hear any more news about Clemson the rest of the year, or they deserve another opportunity. They don't, man. So I am going to be definitely tuned into that Bank of America game and pulling for them Dogs, especially against Clemson. Man, I hate Clemson.
Yeah, and it's a good point you made there. I don't think we've referenced this enough, but we've been on record. We think Georgia's going to win that game, but
yeah,
and I'm not flip-flopping on that prediction or anything, but if you look at it, let's say Georgia for some reason does drop that game.
Yeah,
they can easily get back into the college football playoff and win the SEC. For Clemson, you lose that game, your season's done because you're playing a damn joke of a league, and I don't think they play another ranked team the entire year. So, I mean, let's eliminate Clemson week 1. I just think that'd be glorious, and I hope that doesn't give them any added motivation that their joke of a conference is not going to help them get back in after they lose to Georgia. You know what?
Oh, man. And the Georgia fans, they need it. They need a victory like that. They don't want a close victory like they had against Notre Dame a few years ago.
Right.
I mean, they won that game, but then there was a lot of people like, well, if there was another quarter, Notre Dame would have won that thing. Yeah, we don't want to have that. We want you to just beat the brakes off of them. So then we're not talking about Clemson and Dabo, and then maybe he's leaving. I mean, we just need that program to go away. Mm-hmm. I think they had a fantastic quarterback there last year. I gave him a hard time, but he was a freaking athlete. Let's just say it.
Yeah.
Should have been at the University of Tennessee, but whatever. Whole other story there. But he's gone. And now they're extremely young. He's talking about Georgia and all this senior leadership. And I think that's where they win this game. They come out, they know how big this thing is. You got to remember, some of these young kids at Clemson haven't played in front of 100,000 fans yet. They don't know. A lot of Georgia players have. And that's what I'm expecting them to come out, loud ruckus, bring some of that Georgia defense that we saw early in the season last year and bring some of that offense that we saw late in the season last year. And I tell you what, man, it would not surprise me if they don't hang 3 or 4 touchdowns on these boys. I'm already betting, man. Lock of the week, baby. Already I'm putting on the Georgia Bulldogs.
Well, Shane, you got me fired up. I don't know about everybody else, but now I'm ready to go into the weekend and thinking about not only that game, but all the great games here. We're about 20 days away, 22, I believe, as this podcast comes out from the college football season, and only 20 from Tennessee's kickoff here. So,
right.
Man, I cannot wait for it. But unless you got anything else, buddy, I'm ready to wrap this one up.
No, man, that's it. Fantastic day, fantastic interview. We did get some bad news out there, guys. I know a couple of you guys got some really bad news, and just hang loose. Hopefully that's the last of the injuries. Just 1 second, Mike. Sorry, Core's catching up to me there. I didn't have a cold beer. It was cold-ish, but I had to put it in the freezer for the last 5 minutes, and it's fool's gold because after the sip is like, oh, wait, them mountains ain't ready yet. So anyway, no, we took some bad news, took some hits today, but we also got some great stuff. And like I said, fantastic interview. I'm looking forward to some more news coming out. This is the last one for the week, ain't it? So
Yes,
we'll be back Monday, right?
You got it.
All right, man. 2 days closer. I love it. So everybody out there, enjoy your weekend.
Yeah, and if you made it this far, of course, give us that 5-star written review on the Apple Podcast app. We really do appreciate each and every one of those, and we give you a free beer koozie just for doing that. And, of course, check us out on YouTube. That's blowing up. So we really appreciate all the support there as well. But that's going to do it. We'll catch you on the next one.
Oh, we fumbled on Friday, baby. All right, man. Enjoy your last day at work, guys. Get it over with. Get out of there. Enjoy your weekend. But, yeah, I'm out too. Go Vols.